Hello everybody, I'm Cambridge English teacher Rory, or Cambridge Rory from studentlanguages.com, and in today's video I'm going to be assessing a CPE student's essay writing answer. So let's get started. First we're going to read the essay question. It says, Part 1. Read the two texts below. Write an essay summarizing and evaluating the key points from both texts. Use your own words throughout as far as possible, and include your own ideas in your answers. Write your answer in 240 to 280 words on the separate answer sheet. Okay, so let's read these two passages first then. This is still in the question, remember? These are the texts that are mentioned here in the question. Is this text number 1 and this text number 2 below. So number 1 says, self-reliance is the way forward. When disaster strikes, it is only natural for individuals and nations to want to help victims of floods, drought, and earthquakes by sending food and medical aid. The countries affected the hardest are normally the poorer, less developed nations of the world. Already burdened by poverty and debt, these acts of charity can be true lifesavers at times of crisis. However, providing charity on a regular basis, or even going as far as cancelling third world debt, would only be detrimental to their future development and social progress. What these countries need is to learn to rely on themselves and act on their own initiatives, rather than depend on a continuous flow of handouts. Okay, so that's passage 1. And passage 2 is, the poor are subsidizing the rich. Debt has crippled many developing countries. It is often the result of loans taken out by prior, often corrupt rulers. The people have not benefited and now face poorer and poorer living standards as precious resources are diverted to debt repayment at very high interest rates. These countries are repaying billions of dollars that could be going to developing infrastructure, healthcare, and education. In addition, environmental issues and debt are closely related. Not only do indebted countries cut back on social health and other important programs, but they also feel that they need to exploit the Earth's resources for the cash that is so desperately needed. Resolving debt-related issues would therefore indirectly help mitigate environmental damage. Okay, so we have the student's original answer, but I am also going to make comments on a copy of the answer here as I read through it. And I will also add my comments and marks to the examiner's assessment scale template, so you can see how a real examiner would mark your work. And we'll see at the end what mark this writing receives. I can already tell by looking at it here that it's longer than 280 words. I'd say it's probably even more than 300 words. And that will immediately make the examiner think that there's probably information here which is not relevant. So yeah, it's important really to try and stay in that frame of 240 to 280 if you can. It will help the examiner's mentality as well when he's marking your exam to think, let's hope that most of the information is relevant. Whereas if they say it's too long, they might think some is irrelevant. Anyway, let's get started. So it says, since the dawn of humanity, there has been a continuous readiness to aid a troubled peer. At first glance, general support may appear normal and entirely harmless. Nonetheless, the indispensability of self-reliance for survival has been repeatedly proven throughout history. Furthermore, a number of underdeveloped countries afflicted with unmanageable debts resort to unpalatable methods for repayment. There's a lot of uns in this sentence. Underdeveloped, unmanageable, unpalatable. Some big words though, some good words like indispensability, which are less common. In fact, I'll add that to the language section. Yeah, I think it's fine as an introduction paragraph. I think it's quite good because we're talking about what's mentioned in those texts. So general report may appear normal and entirely harmless, although one of them suggests that that's not the case, and that self-reliance is really important was also mentioned in the text. So yeah, and how being self-reliant can actually result in problems for the environment. So it's all good so far, I think. As ingeniously conveyed in the first text. Good. So, okay, so we've got the introduction, which is nice and clear, and the paragraphs are clearly separated, so that's good. I can add that to organization. Okay, so we've got our first main paragraph, which is reflecting on the first text. So that seems good so far. As ingeniously conveyed in the first text, the nature of aid is rather complex, owing to its diverse possible outcomes. Although the provision of support to countries that greatly need it is irrefutably a suitable action from a moral point of view, and could even considerably alleviate the burdensome situation of abject poverty, potential for negative impacts must never be ignored. Yeah. Yeah, good. So we're saying it's an irrefutably suitable action. Although, actually, in the second text, I think it's suggesting that actually maybe it's not a suitable action. Let's remind ourselves, the second text. People haven't benefited. So maybe I would just change the word irrefutably, because it seems like it is refutable. Maybe I would just change this word for that reason. So you can find another word which is more suitable. So I'll write that down here in the language section. There are a couple of points where the language doesn't quite encapsulate the idea of the writer, because it doesn't quite, isn't quite true, I suppose, but I think you know it's not true because of that second text, so it doesn't quite encapsulate the idea of the writer. For example, the use of the word irrefutably in the first main paragraph. I'll highlight it so you know for later. Never-ending assistance may, in the course of time, lead to the inability of the authorities of a certain beneficiary country to sustain themselves subsequently. It's a bit of a wordy sentence, this. Maybe I would remove some words. So, for example, never-ending assistance may, in the course of time, lead to the inability of, maybe I would remove this, of authorities. I'd probably say authorities from a certain beneficiary country to sustain themselves. Yeah, I just want to read that first text again. See if that is what it's saying. Yeah, detrimental to their future development and social progress. Yeah. So, yeah, what we're talking about, again, is just future development and social progress. Whereas what we're saying here is the inability of the authorities to sustain themselves, which is a little bit of a different idea, I suppose. I think maybe you could make this sentence, or this part of the sentence, really it's just the authorities part, a bit more accurate to what the first text is saying without using the same words. I think that would be beneficial. So that would help with the communicative achievement a little bit. There are times where the content, I suppose, actually probably more in the content section. There are times where the content could be more closely tied to the ideas of the main text. For example, when talking about authorities in the first main paragraph, I think you could tie that a bit more closely to what it actually says in the first main text. But what I will say about the language so far is that the language is using, or the writer has used, let's see, his own words throughout, which is good. He hasn't copied the same words as the texts. So that's a good thing. In view of such potential repercussions, sensibility and moderation are key considerations when engaging in aid. In order to avoid any unwanted consequences. Yeah, good. Good, and some good words and phrases again, so I'll add them to this list. Repercussions, I like that word. I think there were a couple more earlier in the paragraph which I enjoyed as well, like burdensome. Anyway, okay. The second text sheds light on the problematic and often senseless ways in which severely indebted countries attempt to perform loan repayment. There seem to be two main, widely adopted ways of dealing with the issue of enormous debts. The first being the utilization of sums originally allocated for the development of infrastructure. I'm not sure that these sums have been originally allocated for the development of infrastructure. I just want to read that second text again. So yeah, so the billions of dollars could be going to developing infrastructure, but I don't think they've necessarily originally been allocated for that. I think that the debt, when it's given to these people, is probably not allocated for infrastructure, but it's probably allocated for providing food and stuff, I suppose, or yeah, medicine would be my guess. But okay, so precious resources are diverted to debt repayment. But again, I wouldn't say that those precious resources are necessarily from the development of infrastructure necessarily. So yeah, that's similar to a point I made earlier about the content. In the second main paragraph, which is actually the third paragraph, second main paragraph, talking about the text 2. I'm going to say the sum. It doesn't say that the sums have been originally allocated for the development of infrastructure. Which is not what is said in the second main text. These couple of things make me think that, okay, there's a bit of improvement needed here in this content section. So I'm just going to give that a 2 for now. Let's keep reading. Sums originally allocated for the development of infrastructure, healthcare, education, and additional facilities, while the other being the desperate exploitation of resources, which is prone to result in the endangerment of the environment. Yeah, and I think that's good. I think that is what's mentioned. Let's just remind ourselves. They also feel that they need to exploit the Earth's resources for the cash that's so desperately needed. Yeah. And so that's sort of indirectly saying that that's going to cause environmental damage. So, yeah, that's good. Exploitation of resources. And it says here, exploit the Earth's resources. So it would be good if you could try to think of a different way to say this. That would be good, just to show different words. It's good that it's a noun here, but maybe you could think of another way to phrase this. I added that into language editing. That's a good thing, but there are times has used his own words. I'd say on the whole, the writer has used his own words, but there are times when these words are probably too close to the words from the text. So there are opportunities for improvement there. Let's see. The language at the moment I think is okay. The organization I think is good so far. So we got to, it is prone to result in the endangerment of the environment. As such, it is essential for all countries to become sufficiently self-reliant to prevent financial hardship and environmental issues. Okay. The tone of the writing is good. It's also sufficiently neutral writing. So I'll add that to language as well. Is appropriate for an essay. Language is appropriate for an essay. note. In conclusion, it goes without saying that independence is one of the intrinsic values of long-term survival, both for an individual and the collective. As with the emergence of unfortunate events, an entity must be resilient enough to fight solitarily. Maybe what I would do is put a full stop here and write this as a new sentence, because it's quite a long sentence, not so easy to read. Add that to communicative achievement. The text is fairly easy to follow, but there are times where it could be simplified, maybe with a few more full stops, etc., in order for it to be read more easily. Let's give that a 2, because there were a few times when I've sort of had to really slow down to read. Sometimes that's been because of the ideas and my thinking, but sometimes it's because it could be made a bit easier to follow through the language. For example, here, like I said a minute ago. Both for an individual and the collective, as with the emergence of unfortunate events, an entity must be resilient enough to fight solitarily. I'd probably go even further than to say it's a value. I'd probably say it's actually a need of long-term survival. Besides that, the difficult living circumstances of currently poor countries could also be solved by the establishment of a strong economy. Okay, so this last point about the establishment of a strong economy is the writer's own idea. However, I feel like that. So, firstly, let's say that it's too long. So we need to. The paragraphs are more or less the same size. So we need to try and remove some information. Be the first thing. Right then, content, and that could be done through communicative achievement. That you could maybe say some of your ideas just in fewer words. So the writing is over the word limit and could be shortened. The use of more effective words and phrases to describe ideas, and writing could also benefit from some more of the author's own ideas. And that's why I'm going to keep it as a 2, which is what I mentioned earlier. Communicative achievement I talked about a little bit already, saying basically it could be made a little bit more simple and easy to follow at times, I think. It's just the ideas themselves that are too long, but the actual organization and connection is okay between the sentences and even on the paragraph level. So I said organization is good, but communicative achievement could be improved, content could be improved, and language is good enough. Language is, some really nice language at times. I think I mentioned, that they could be made a bit more accurate, which again, okay, that is one thing, and then also the language can also tie into this communicative achievement, and content being made a bit shorter, using 1 word instead of 3 in some circumstances, for example. And and I think that this is okay. Like, there is a clear separation between the writer's language and the language of the text, but if you could just keep that in mind and be wary of it throughout, not to use the exact same words, I think that would be a good thing to remember also. But generally, I think that the language was good enough. So the marks that it's going to receive are 2, 2, 4, and 3, which is 4, 8, 11. So in the writing paper, you need 24 out of 40. So if you got 13 in the part 2, that would be good enough. But yeah, you need to average 12 out of 20 for both writings. So it's really close, and it's a really good attempt. And there are some fairly simple things I think you can do just to nudge it up another mark or two and hopefully get your pass. So I hope you found this video useful. I've been Cambridge Rory, or Cambridge English Teacher Rory from studentlanguages.com, and I'll see you in another video soon. Bye bye.